My fellow Nigerians, as your future president and as a Christian with a godly political leadership calling, I've always advocated for God-fearing Christians to get involved in national politics and governance. In fact, back in June, I was greatly honored to speak on this subject at the Missionsville International Theological Seminary in Abuja. There, I encouraged the seminarians, mostly Christian leaders from different ministries, to speak up for Christians to get into politics. So, of course, I was greatly edified and inspired to see the revival sparked by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the great American political and thought leader who by now needs no introduction, including the widely publicized evangelism at Kirk's memorial by US President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and other senior Trump administration officials, which led to what the New York Times aptly described as, I quote, an extraordinary fusion of government and Christianity, end of quote. Now, let me begin with a few verses of scripture that justify why Christians shouldn't stay away from politics. Let's start from the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, God says to mankind, and I quote, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over everything upon the earth," end of quote. Now, how can you subdue or have dominion over the earth without controlling the levels of authority that can subdue or have dominion over the earth? Similarly, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 to 15, Jesus says of the church, I quote, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden," end of quote. We just can't be all that as the church by staying away from politics. Then in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, Moses' father-in-law Jethro advises him on the decentralization of authority and on the type of people to be appointed leaders at various levels. Jethro said, and I quote, "But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens," end of quote. Many generations later, Nehemiah, speaking as governor of Judah in Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 15, said, and I quote, "But the former governors that had been before me had placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. But so did not I, because of the fear of God," end of quote. Likewise, David, speaking in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 3, in what is described as his last words, which gives more weight to them, says, I quote, "The God of Israel said, he that rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God," end of quote. Also, Proverbs 29, verse 2, many people are familiar with this verse of scripture. It says, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people mourn," end of quote. So yes, we need God-fearing leaders who will uphold godliness and terrorize evil. Indeed, the Bible's definition of authority in Romans chapter 13, verse 3 to 4 makes us understand clearly that authority is to be used for the good of those being governed and mainly against wrongdoing. It says, and I quote, "For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer," end of quote. So what lessons can we learn from the Charlie Kirk Memorial? Lesson number 1, God-fearing Christians must get involved in politics. I'm not talking about being on the sidelines and praying for things to change for the better. No, I'm talking about publicly condemning evil and bad governance and running for office. On this, Josh Dawes, a U.S. Christian podcaster, wrote on X, and I quote, "Right now, God is shaming the wisdom of every church leader who said politics was a distraction from the gospel," end of quote. Ali Beth Stockey, a U.S. conservative commentator, concurred and wrote on X, and I quote, "In the end, it wasn't the soft presence Christians who sparked the revival. It was those who boldly persisted in telling the truth and pushed relentlessly against the darkness in our culture," end of quote. Similarly, Steve Dees, a U.S. conservative talk show host, wrote on X, and I quote, "What's happening now as a result of the life and legacy of Charlie Kirk should forever shame the culturally capitulating and cowardly era. Charlie proved that one of the greatest evangelistic messages is to engage the culture and be a force for good that stands up to evil," end of quote. Yes, Charlie engaged the culture and was a political giant. He led the most influential grassroots movement in today's America. But apart from his many campus and other events, Charlie Kirk's content got 15 billion views prior to the 2024 US presidential election. A TikTok survey showed that he was the most trusted voice for Trump supporters under 30. Add the fact that the youth vote went about 13% to Trump in 2024, and you'll see just how much impact he had in getting Trump reelected. Indeed, Charlie's Turning Point USA did the vast majority of Trump's voter outreach last year. And he also influenced Trump's choice of Vice President Vance as his running mate. Now, that's why Trump, Vance, and so many of the administration's top officials attended the memorial. Now, lesson number 2. The church needs to emphasize the power of divine purpose. Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old when he was assassinated. He founded Turning Point USA at the age of 18. The only reason he was able to make so much impact in such a short period of time is because of the power of divine purpose. The same thing with Joseph and David in the Bible. You can feel Joseph's passion when you read about him talking about his dream and when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. You can feel David's passion when you read about him confronting Goliath. Great passion like that only comes from divine purpose. So yes, we need to encourage young people to discover and pursue their God-ordained purpose. Also, it is noteworthy that Charlie Kirk did not start a church. He started a youth empowerment movement, Turning Point, to mobilize young people to stand up against the evil and deceptive trends and indoctrination from the liberal and woke leftists and Democrats. In other words, he met a specific need. In Nigeria, for example, many Christian leaders whose purpose is in providing solutions to specific needs would rather simply start a church. Not only is this trend really counterproductive, but it reinforces the criticism that many are simply using the church to make money. Lesson number 3. The memorial also aptly demonstrated that the forgiveness of an individual Christian after being the victim of evil can coexist with the justice delivered by the government against that evil. At the memorial, Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, publicly forgave her husband's assassin. Moments before, one of Trump's top policy officials, Stephen Miller, had vowed to punish evil and evildoers like Kirk's assassin. To put things in perspective, listen to what these two commentators had to say. First, Ali Beth Stuckey, whom I mentioned earlier, wrote on X saying, and I quote, "There was a big contrast between Erica's forgiveness speech and Stephen Miller's destroy our enemies speech, exactly as it should be. It is our job to forgive, not the government's. Christians give grace, the government wields the sword." Romans chapter 13. "We turn the other cheek, the government punishes evil." End of quote. Similarly, William Wolf, a Baptist leader who previously worked for the Trump administration, wrote on X saying, and I quote, "It is Erica Kirk's Christian duty as a private citizen to forgive. It is the government's God-given duty, including Donald Trump, to punish evildoers and avenge the innocent. These are not contradictory statements. See Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 7, end of quote." Now, I added this third lesson for 2 reasons. First, to clarify some doubts that some Christians have had about the seemingly contradictory positions. Second, to make it quite clear in advance that as president of Nigeria, and yes, even as a committed Christian, I will push for the death penalty for certain levels of corruption. I'll find a way to convince the National Assembly to pass such a law. So when that happens, for example, there should be no mutual exclusivity assumptions about my obligations as a Christian to forgive and my responsibilities as president to punish the corrupt. My fellow Nigerians and dear friends, there is so much to learn from Charlie Kirk's amazing life and incredible legacy, including his wonderful Turning Point USA movement. In other words, this isn't the last you'll be hearing from me about Charlie Kirk. May God bless Erica Kirk and Turning Point USA. May God bless the United States of America. And may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.